Imagine a courtroom with no judge, no jury, no wooden gavel banging on the desk to deliver a verdict. Yet the light of justice burns fiercely like an unquenchable flame, piercing through every layer of deception to expose the darkest corners of a human soul. We're here today not to watch a Hollywood movie or listen to a fictional tale, but to step into the real life of Daniel Dan Hargrove, a name that once echoed through the halls of power in Ohio as a symbol of honesty and hope in American politics. A man with neatly combed salt and pepper hair, eyes blazing with conviction, and a deep, warm voice capable of melting even the coldest hearts. But is that all there is to him? Or is it just a perfectly staged performance, hiding a truth darker than your worst nightmare? Picture this scene. Hargrove stands at a podium during a charity fundraiser in Columbus. Flashes from dozens of cameras lighting up his tailored navy suit, accentuating his confident demeanor. The crowd below, wealthy donors in glossy tuxedos and ordinary folks in simple sweaters, gazes at him with unguarded admiration. "I'm here to serve the American people," he says, his tone deliberate yet weighty, as if each word is carved into the air. "Not for fame, not for money, but because I believe in a better America." Applause erupts like thunder, reverberating through the room, and in that moment, Hargrove seems to embody every dream ever pinned on politics, a lighthouse piercing the chaotic storm of life. But then, just hours after the stage lights dim, as the last handshakes fade and the smile lingers on his lips, a plain brown envelope with no sender's name appears on the desk of an editor at the Columbus Dispatch. No note, no distinguishing mark, just a simple piece of paper inside, yet it carries the force of an atomic bomb primed to detonate. It's a receipt, not the kind you get with your morning coffee, but evidence that Hargrove accepted $500,000 from a shadowy construction firm in exchange for approving a controversial highway project he'd publicly opposed. What would the cheering crowd think now? Do his promises of integrity still hold when the ink on that receipt stands as an indelible accusation? Daniel Hargrove isn't your average politician. At 45, he'd become the youngest senator in Ohio's history, a rising star whose inspiring speeches left both rivals and allies in awe. He often appeared on TV with a perfect smile, hand in hand with his elegant wife and 3 adorable children, the ideal family portrait any politician would envy. "I'm a family man," he once declared on CNN, his gaze steady with unmasked pride, "and I bring those values to my work every day." But if you look closer, past the polished veneer of his public image, you'll see faint cracks emerging. Projects approved too quickly, late-night closed-door meetings, and whispers in the Senate corridors about a man not as simple as he seems. The story of Daniel Hargrove doesn't begin with that mysterious brown envelope or the cold lines of the $500,000 receipt. No, it starts in his glory days when his name was a promise, a warm flame in the hearts of millions of Ohio voters. Imagine an autumn afternoon in 2018, golden leaves drifting across Columbus's central square, where thousands crammed together to witness a historic moment. Daniel Hargrove, at 41, steps onto the platform to be sworn in as Ohio's youngest senator, his hands raised as if to embrace the sky. The gray suit he wears that day isn't flashy, but it's refined enough to highlight his tall frame, his salt and pepper hair swept back neatly, and his deep blue eyes radiating a determination that captivates anyone who meets his gaze. "I'm here to serve," he declares, his low voice booming through the loudspeakers, "not to sit in lavish rooms or count money in the shadows. I'm here for you, the workers, the families struggling to get by." The crowd explodes in cheers, tiny flags waving like a sea in motion, and in that instant, Hargrove isn't just a politician, he's a symbol, a beacon amid the tempest of distrust in government. But if you think Hargrove was just a fresh face with pretty words, you're mistaken. He was a man who knew how to turn words into action. At least, that's what people saw on the surface. In his first year in the Senate, he fought tirelessly to pass a healthcare bill for low-income families, frequently appearing on TV with a warm smile and heartfelt stories from the campaign trail. I remember a single mother in Dayton. He recounted on 60 Minutes, his voice catching as if genuinely moved. She hugged me and said that without healthcare her son wouldn't have survived his asthma attack. That's why I do this. The camera zoomed in on his face, his eyes glistening with a hint of tears as proof of his sincerity, and viewers across America couldn't help but feel their hearts stir. Hargrove didn't just talk, he seemed to live for the values he preached. His family was an inseparable part of that narrative. Picture this: a Sunday morning at First Baptist Church on the outskirts of Columbus, Hargrove standing in the aisle, hand in hand with his elegant wife Ellen, her glossy brown hair tied neatly back. Beside them are their 3 children, 2 boys with radiant smiles, and a little girl with big round eyes, all dressed impeccably, like a scene from a perfect family portrait. "I'm a family man," he'd proclaimed on CNN, his eyes locked on the camera with unabashed pride, "and I bring those values to my work every day. I want my kids to grow up in a country they can be proud of." Those words weren't just a slogan, they were the bedrock of his public image, a steel wall no one dared question or breach. Ellen, a former elementary school teacher, often appeared beside him at events, always smiling gently, as if she were the keeper of the flame for the lighthouse Hargrove represented. Yet even in those golden days when the spotlight shone brightest, shadows quietly crept in. Those close to Hargrove began to notice something amiss. Not glaring red flags, but subtle details, like cracks in a seemingly flawless pane of glass. A former aide who requested anonymity once confided in me during a hushed conversation that Hargrove frequently held late-night closed-door meetings in his Senate office with unidentified figures. One time I saw him leave a meeting with a bulging leather briefcase, the aide whispered, voice tinged with unease, and when I asked what it was, he just laughed and said, "Don't worry, just papers," but I knew it wasn't true. Then there were the projects approved out of nowhere, like the Western Ohio Highway, a plan Hargrove had publicly opposed for environmental reasons, only to see it greenlit in mere weeks without explanation. Whispers began circulating in the Senate halls, suspicious glances exchanged over cold coffee cups. "Hargrove isn't as straightforward as he looks," a colleague once remarked in a private meeting, his tone a mix of curiosity and caution. "He plays this game better than we think." And then, like a cold wind cutting through a sweltering summer day, that brown envelope appeared, unleashing a storm no one, not even Hargrove, could have foreseen. Every piece of the perfect image he'd built began to wobble, and his promises of integrity and serving the people now rang hollow in the minds of those who once believed in him. But that was just the beginning. What was about to unfold wouldn't merely scratch Daniel Hargrove's reputation. It would be a spectacular collapse, peeling away layer after layer of his mask to reveal the man beneath the glow. The cold wind blowing through Daniel Hargrove's glory days wasn't just a breeze. It marked the start of a ferocious storm, sweeping away everything he'd painstakingly constructed. Imagine a late evening in Columbus, just days after that charity fundraiser we witnessed, when the stage lights had faded and the city settled into the stillness of night. At the Columbus Dispatch newsroom, an aging editor with glasses slipping down his nose was about to leave when the doorbell rang. No one was there, just a plain brown envelope resting silently on the doorstep, no sender's name, no explanation. He picked it up, tore it open, and as his eyes scanned the figures on the receipt inside, $500,000 from Ritter & Sons, a notorious construction firm, he knew he held a ticking time bomb. This wasn't a charitable donation or a legitimate deal. It was proof that Hargrove, who'd stood at podiums vowing to serve the people, had sold his soul for dirty money to push through a highway project he'd publicly denounced. The news spread like wildfire across dry grass, and within hours, Daniel Hargrove's name was no longer a beacon of hope. It was the epicenter of a seismic scandal. But the story didn't end there. As the first rays of truth began to pierce the shadows, an anonymous hacker group called Truth Seekers emerged from the digital darkness, releasing a document more damning than the receipt. It was an internal email sent from a secret account Hargrove thought untouchable. "Jim," it began, cold and blunt, "I need $500,000 in the offshore account by Friday. In return, your project gets the green light. Leave no trace." The recipient was James Ritter, CEO of Ritter & Sons, a man with a sly grin and a reputation tied to shady deals. This email didn't just confirm the money, It painted a stark picture of a senator willing to trade every value he'd preached for a stuffed wallet. When it hit X with the hashtag Hargrove scandal, social media erupted. "This is who we voted for," one user wrote, voice laced with anger and disillusionment. "Hargrove isn't a lighthouse, he's a snake in the shadows," another commented, and within minutes, thousands of shares turned the email into a blaze that torched his reputation. Hargrove didn't sit still. The next morning, as the sun peeked over Ohio's horizon, he took to Twitter, once his platform for inspirational quotes and happy family photos. "I am innocent," he posted, the words brief but defiant, like a declaration of war against the mounting accusations. "This is a political conspiracy to smear me, orchestrated by those jealous of my success. I will prove the truth." The post garnered hundreds of likes from loyal supporters, but it drowned in thousands of mocking and furious replies. "Prove it, Dan," one wrote, attaching a screenshot of the email. "Offshore accounts don't just appear out of nowhere," another sneered. The pressure mounted, and Hargrove knew he couldn't hide behind 280-character defenses forever. He needed to face it head-on, so an emergency press conference was called at the Ohio State Senate building, where he'd once walked with the swagger of a hero. The scene at the press conference was a chaotic mess beyond control. Hargrove stood behind the podium, his navy suit now wrinkled, his deep blue eyes no longer shining with resolve but flickering with barely concealed panic. The microphone buzzed with static as he began, his voice trembling yet straining for strength. "This is a political conspiracy," he shouted, slamming his hand on the podium so hard the water glass beside him shook and spilled across the wood. "I've spent my life serving Ohio's people, and now my enemies are trying to destroy it all with lies." The reporters below, cameras and phones raised high, gave him no quarter. A middle-aged man from the Dispatch, his voice sharp as a blade, stood and held up a printed copy of the Truth Seeker's email. "Senator Hargrove," he asked, his gaze cutting through the stifling air, "how do you explain the line, 'I need 500 grand in the offshore account'? Is this your digital signature?" The question hit like a bullet to the chest, and in that moment, Hargrove's face paled, sweat trickling down his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, awaiting his response, but Hargrove only stammered, his lips twitching as if searching for an escape in his own labyrinth. I don't know anything about this," he finally choked out, his voice so faint it was nearly inaudible. "Maybe someone forged it. I don't have any offshore account." But his words were swallowed by the crowd's jeers. Someone yelled from the back. "Put him on trial!" another roared, and the air turned chaotic as reporters jostled to capture Hargrove's unraveling. A microphone dropped, emitting a piercing screech like the sound of his reputation shattering under unbearable strain. Hargrove raised his hands, trying to signal for calm, but no one listened. His eyes darted around, seeking a friendly face in the sea of turned backs, but all he found was rage and disappointment. The press conference ended in disarray, but that wasn't the end. The brown envelope and email were just the first bricks in a wall of truth being built to trap Hargrove. What he didn't know, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that more evidence lurked in the shadows, ready to step into the light and seal his unofficial sentence. The storm tearing through Daniel Hargrove's life didn't stop after that chaotic press conference. It only roared louder, bringing with it razor-sharp blades of truth to shred what remained of his reputation. Imagine a rainy evening in Columbus, days after the 500 grand in the offshore account email shook social media. Raindrops pound the windows of a small apartment, where Emily Carter, a 32-year-old with disheveled blonde hair and red-rimmed eyes from sleepless nights, sits across from me. She was once Hargrove's closest aide, always lingering behind him with a forced smile in Senate photos. Now, in the dim room, her trembling hands clutch a cold coffee mug, her voice breaking as she decides to shatter her silence. "I can't live with this secret anymore," she whispers, as if the walls might have ears. "I saw him meet James Ritter in the office late one night, after everyone had gone home. They didn't know I was there behind the half-closed door," Hargrove said. "If anyone asks, just say it's a charity donation. I felt sick, but I was scared, of losing my job, of what he might do if I spoke up." She pauses, takes a shaky breath, then slides a crumpled paper toward me. A copy of a Swiss bank transfer receipt, Hargrove's financial fingerprints as clear as a confession in black ink. Emily's testimony is like a boulder crashing into a still lake, sending ripples across Ohio and beyond. But that's not all. Hours after I aired her story on an independent podcast, truth seekers struck again, releasing a document that chilled anyone still clinging to faith in Hargrove. It was a campaign fund ledger showing $50,000 withdrawn to buy a luxury Cleveland condo, not for his family, not for charity, but for Sophia Lane, a 25-year-old model with long, glossy black hair and a smile gracing dozens of fashion magazines. Sophia wasn't unknown to Washington gossip circles, but no one suspected she'd be a piece in Hargrove's puzzle. Then, as if fate demanded a crescendo, a leaked audio clip surfaced on X from an anonymous account. Hargrove's voice, low and smug, rings out. "Don't worry, sweetheart, no one will know. This money's from the public, but now it's ours." Sophia's soft, icy laugh follows. "You sure know how to make me happy, Dan." The clip, under 20 seconds, incinerates every excuse Hargrove had offered. The man who stood in church with his wife and kids, who spoke of family values, on CNN was now exposed as a two-faced hypocrite siphoning voter money to fuel his dark secrets. The storm of evidence didn't relent. On a Saturday night, as the nation glued itself to screens tracking the saga, truth seekers delivered their final blow, a security camera video from the Ohio State Senate garage. The footage is grainy but unmistakable. Hargrove, in his familiar black coat, stands beside James Ritter under a faint yellow light at 2 a.m. Ritter hands him a small suitcase, and Hargrove opens it, revealing neatly stacked cash. "Thanks, Jim," Hargrove says, a smug grin spreading across his face. "With this, I could buy all of Ohio." Ritter nods, his voice low like a seasoned accomplice. "Just keep your word, Dan." We both know the price of fame. The video ends with Hargrove walking off, suitcase swinging in hand, as if he'd just closed a routine deal. When it hit X with "Hargrove caught," social media ignited again. "This is undeniable proof," one user wrote, paired with hundreds of angry emojis. "Hargrove's done for," another declared, and within hours, millions of views turned the clip into a death knell for his career. The pressure now came not just from the public, but from those once in Hargrove's corner. Ellen, his ever-smiling wife, appeared on a local TV station, her face pale and eyes swollen. "I didn't know about Sophia," she said, her voice quivering yet resolute, "and I can't forgive what he's done to our family, to the people who trusted him." Her words stabbed the heart of the family man image Hargrove had crafted. Meanwhile, Senate colleagues publicly turned away. Senator Margaret Klein, who'd once called him a close friend, faced the press with an icy tone. "If these allegations are true, and everything suggests they are, Daniel no longer deserves to represent Ohio." The air in Columbus grew stifling, as if the entire city held its breath for Hargrove's final fall. But Hargrove wouldn't surrender easily. He called a second press conference, this time in a smaller hall with fewer flashing lights and no cheering crowd. He stood behind the podium, hands gripping the wood as if to keep from collapsing, his voice no longer resonant but hoarse with strain. "I don't deny there were mistakes," he began, eyes darting to avoid the cameras. "But I swear I never meant to harm Ohio's people. What you've seen is just part of the story, twisted by my enemy." Yet when a reporter asked, "How do you explain the garage video?" Senator Hargrove froze. His lips pressed tight, sweat beaded on his brow, and in that moment the world saw he had nothing left to say. The jeers rose again, softer this time, as if even his critics were weary of his charade. The storm of evidence finally subsided, but it didn't leave silence, only the wreckage of what had been Daniel Hargrove's illustrious career. Imagine a dreary afternoon in Columbus, days after the garage video swept social media, turning him from a revered senator into a national pariah. The sky hung gray, mirroring the city's mood, and in a small hall at the Hilton, Hargrove stood behind a podium for his final time as a free man. Gone were the flashing lights and thunderous applause of his swearing-in or fundraisers. Only a handful of reporters scattered about, cameras quietly rolling, and a small group of protesters outside hoisting signs reading, "Hargrove, Ohio's betrayer." The navy suit that once flattered his confident frame now hung loose on his gaunt figure, as if he'd lost both vitality and soul in mere days. His deep blue eyes, once a weapon to charm millions, were now bloodshot and sunken, avoiding every gaze in the room. This wasn't the Hargrove of stirring speeches. This was a man cornered, forced to face a truth he could no longer flee. As he spoke, his voice rasped, each word dragged from a deep well in his chest. I've made mistakes, he croaked, trembling hands resting on the podium to steady himself. I don't deny there are things I did wrong, but I swear to you, I only wanted what's best for my state, for Ohio's people. The words hung feeble and lost in the stifling space, met with no applause or reply. A young reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, his face devoid of pity, cut in. "Senator Hargrove," he said, voice icy, "you say what's best. So how do you explain taking $50,000 from campaign funds for Sophia Lane's condo? Was that for Ohio or for you?" The question sliced into an open wound, and Hargrove stood motionless, lips sealed, sweat rolling down his forehead despite the room's chill. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound emerged, only a heavy silence, echoing his own downfall. Outside, the crowd grew louder, chanting, "Give us our money back," as the noise pierced the glass, turning the press conference into a gladiator's arena with no escape. That moment was the final unmasking, not through new documents or footage, but through Hargrove's own helplessness before undeniable evidence. The $500,000 receipt from Ritter and Sons, the offshore email, Emily Carter's testimony, the Sophia Lane recording, the garage video, all formed a verdict needing no judge or jury. Hargrove was no longer the lighthouse of Ohio hailed on his 2018 swearing-in day. He was now a symbol of hypocrisy, a man who'd placed personal image and greed above his duty to millions who'd trusted him. Hours after the press conference, the Ohio Senate voted overwhelmingly, 28-5, to strip him of his seat. Criminal charges, embezzlement, bribery, misuse of public funds, were swiftly filed, with prosecutors warning he could face over 20 years in prison if convicted. Ellen, who'd once stood beside him in church with a gentle smile, filed for divorce the next day, taking their 3 children from the home they'd once called a haven. "I can't live with a man I no longer recognize," she said in a brief statement, her tone pained yet firm. But Hargrove's collapse wasn't just one man's story. It was a mirror reflecting deep cracks in a political system where power and fame often eclipse duty. On social media, Hargrove downtrended, with millions sharing their thoughts. "He was my hope," one wrote, attaching a photo from his swearing-in. "Now I just feel disgust." Another posted the garage video with, "This is the price of lies. No one's untouchable." His once loyal supporters fell silent, no defense left to salvage their fallen idol. At a small Columbus coffee shop, I overheard a middle-aged man, his voice bitter, tell his friend, "Hargrove made me think there were still good people in politics. Now I know how naive I was." A heavy mood blanketed the city, as if all of Ohio sighed together over a betrayal they couldn't have foreseen. The cold days in Columbus didn't just bring winter's chill, they carried the frost of a story that seemed to end with Daniel Hargrove. Yet truth, like grass pushing through concrete as we've said, never truly stops growing, and his tale, though closed in the public eye, lingered like a mournful tune that wouldn't fade. Imagine a frigid morning in Columbus, weeks after the Ohio Senate stripped Hargrove of his seat, when winter winds whipped through quiet streets, biting with a cold as sharp as the truth that had slashed his reputation. In a cramped rented apartment on the outskirts, Hargrove sat alone in a worn armchair, faint light from a table lamp illuminating his haggard face. Gone was the tailored navy suit, the confident gaze that once captivated crowds. Now he wore a frayed sweater, hands cradling his head as if shielding himself from screaming memories. On the table lay a crumpled newspaper, its bold headline blaring, "Hargrove faces 20 years, end of an icon." But what he couldn't tear his eyes from was the photo beneath. Him on his 2018 swearing-in day, beaming, hands raised amid a cheering throng, a version of himself he no longer recognized. Out there, the world kept spinning, but there was no place for Hargrove in the spotlight he'd once basked in. Criminal charges, embezzlement, bribery, misuse of public funds had moved to federal court with the first trial set just days away. His lawyers, once bold in claiming they'd uncover the truth, now shook their heads in private meetings, admitting the mountain of evidence from truth seekers. Receipts, emails, recordings, videos, was an impenetrable steel wall. Meanwhile, Ellen and their 3 children had relocated to a small Indiana town, where she hoped to rebuild a life for them free of their father's dark shadow. A close family friend told me over the phone, voice thick with regret, Ellen didn't want the kids to grow up with Hargrove as a curse. She said every time she looks in their eyes, she sees the hurt Dan left behind. Those words cut deep into the family narrative that had propped up Hargrove's public image, a family now shattered beyond repair. But if you think Hargrove's downfall was his alone, you're wrong. This story spread, seeping into every street corner and conversation in Ohio and beyond, like an oil slick that couldn't be scrubbed away. At a dingy bar in downtown Columbus, I found a group of construction workers who'd voted for Hargrove on his Serve the Workers pledge. A man with calloused hands, voice rough from cigarette smoke, slammed his beer mug on the table. I trusted him. I thought he was different. Now I just want to spit on that name. Another, staring into the distance, added, 500 grand from Ritter and Sons, 50 grand for his mistress, all our money, our tax dollars. He didn't just betray Ohio, he betrayed every one of us. The air in the bar grew thick, their anger a smoldering fire ready to flare at any moment. On social media, Hargrove Down burned hot, with posts nationwide branding him the decade's hypocrite, paired with mocking memes. Hargrove in the garage captioned, "When you think you're untouchable, but truth says otherwise." In Washington, Hargrove's scandal rang like a warning bell for other politicians. Some began auditing their own accounts, fearing truth seekers or a similar group might lurk in the shadows, poised to unearth secrets they thought buried. Senator Margaret Klein, who'd abandoned Hargrove, stood before Congress with a steely tone. This isn't just about one man, it's about the system we run. If we don't clean ourselves up, the public will do it for us. Her words echoed through power's corridors, but not everyone listened. Some merely shrugged, resuming their closed-door meetings and murky deals, as if Hargrove were just a pawn sacrificed in a larger game. Then, in an unexpected twist, a letter arrived at the Columbus Dispatch from an unknown address, its scrawled handwriting believed to be Hargrove's. "I don't expect forgiveness," it began, "but I want to say greed clouded my judgment. I once thought I could serve and profit, but I was wrong. I only hope my story warns others." Unverified at first, it spread online, sparking fierce debate. Some dismissed it as a loser's last stunt, while others saw a flicker of late remorse. "If he's truly sorry," an ex-user wrote, "why not say it before he was caught?" Real or not, the letter hung like an ellipsis in Hargrove's tale, not a firm conclusion, but an invitation for the public to decide its meaning. Picture Hargrove standing before a mirror in that rundown apartment, staring at himself. Not a senator, not a hero, but a man who'd lost everything to bad choices. His story isn't just about collapse, it's about the cost of valuing personal image over public duty, about how truth, buried under layers of lies, eventually rises like grass through concrete. It's a lesson for us all, in a world where every act can be exposed by a brown envelope, a video, a testimony. No one is truly untouchable. The cold days in Columbus didn't just bring winter's bite, they carried the frost of a tale that seemed finished with Daniel Hargrove. Yet truth, as we've said, never stops growing, and his story, though faded from public view, lingered like a mournful melody without end. Imagine a gray afternoon at the Ohio Federal Courthouse, months after Hargrove sat alone in that shabby apartment with a newspaper heralding a potential 20-year sentence. The courtroom brimmed with people, not the supporters who'd cheered his 2018 swearing in, but reporters, lawyers, and a smattering of citizens with eyes both curious and furious. Hargrove entered, no longer the poised senator or even the trembling figure from his last press conference. Now he wore a faded orange jumpsuit, his salt and pepper hair a tangled mess, hands cuffed in front, each step heavy as if reminding him of all he'd lost. As he took the defendant's seat, his gaze swept the room, pausing at an empty corner, where Ellen and his children might have sat, but now only silence answered. The judge's gavel struck, sharp as a death knell, and the trial began, not to seek truth, for that was already glaringly clear, but to determine the fate of a man who had once thought himself invincible. The trial didn't drag on as some expected. The prosecutor, a silver-haired woman with a voice like steel, stood and listed each piece of evidence. From the $500,000 Ritter & Sons receipt, the offshore email, Emily Carter's testimony, the Sophia Lane recording, to the garage video, like a roster of sins carved in stone. Daniel Hargrove didn't just break the law, she declared, her eyes sweeping the jury. He broke the trust of millions of Ohioans who voted for him, hoping for a better future. Hargrove's defense attorney made a final plea, his voice shaky as he cited the alleged letter to the Columbus Dispatch. "My client has shown remorse," he said, holding up a copy. "He admits his mistakes and hopes his story becomes a lesson for others." But the prosecutor cut in, her tone slicing like a blade. "Remorse after being caught isn't repentance, it's desperation. Hargrove regrets being exposed, not what he did." The jury sat silent, and Hargrove bowed his head, shoulders trembling as if fighting back tears. But no one in the room felt a shred of pity. After 3 days, the verdict came: 18 years in prison, plus a $1,200,000 fine Hargrove could no longer pay. As the judge read the sentence, sighs rippled through the courtroom, not from surprise, but from the sense of a drama stretched too long finally ending. Hargrove said nothing as he was led away, offering only a final blank stare at the gallery, as if seeking a fragment of the man he'd been. But outside, the world didn't pause to mourn him. On Hargrove sentenced exploded with millions of interactions. "Justice is finally served," one wrote, attaching his prison photo. 18 years isn't enough for what he did to us," another fumed. Yet amid the storm of criticism, a simple post from an anonymous account gave pause. Hargrove was greedy, but who among us is truly innocent when temptation calls? The question dangled, a pebble tossed into a lake of rage. Stirring ripples no one cared to answer. The trial's fallout stretched beyond the courtroom. In Ohio, a wave of political reform stirred, with lawmakers proposing new transparency laws and stricter campaign fund oversight, an attempt to prevent another Hargrove. At coffee shops and street corners, people began questioning their elected leaders, their eyes no longer naive. "I used to think all politicians were a little dirty," an elderly woman told me outside a grocery store clutching a bag of vegetables. "But Hargrove showed me we need to demand more." Meanwhile, Sophia Lane, the model at the scandal's heart, vanished from the spotlight, rumors swirling that she'd fled to Europe with remnants of her lavish days. James Ritter and Ritter & Sons faced their own probe, but the cunning businessman stayed silent, as if waiting out the storm. Then, in a jolt that shook everything, a short video popped up on X from a new account hours after the verdict. The image was blurry, but the voice unmistakable. Hargrove in a cell with a gray concrete wall behind him. "I'm not making this to beg forgiveness," he said, voice hoarse but clear, eyes locking on the camera for the first time in months. "I'm doing this to say I was wrong, not just to my family, not just to Ohio, but to myself. If you're watching, remember power's a double-edged sword. It can build or it can destroy. Don't let it destroy you like it did me." The video cut off abruptly, under a minute long, but spread like wildfire, racking up millions of views in hours. Some called it his final confession. Others suspected a ploy for public sympathy before an appeal. Whatever it was, it left a gaping question. Was Hargrove truly repentant, or was this the last act of a man too used to the spotlight? Picture Hargrove now, lying on a narrow bunk in his cell, light from a tiny window slanting across his face, where wrinkles deeper than his years tell a tale of ambition and ruin. His story isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a mirror reflecting our flaws, a society where image often trumps truth. He entered politics promising to serve the people, but left as a symbol of betrayal, not just to voters, but to the ideals he once held. It's a harsh lesson. No one stands above the truth, and the price of hypocrisy is a sentence measured not just in years, but in scars etched forever in others' hearts. What do you think of Hargrove's end? Is it justice, or just a sad chapter in the long book of power and humanity? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear every perspective, from anger to empathy. And if you're eager to keep exploring stories where justice's light clashes with ambition's shadows, hit that subscribe button now. Hargrove's tale is over, but the stage of truth remains wide open. and we'll step forward together. See you at the next story, where new secrets await their unveiling.